Happy New Year and welcome to 2013. Get ready for it. This is the year we choose a successor to our three-term mayor, Michael Bloomberg. It probably means 5 months of campaigning before the likely June primaries, 10 months to the general election, and tonight we get our bearings. We will look at the hot-button issues likely to dominate this contest and consider some other issues that ought to. Then we'll hear about some newly unearthed documents that activists say reveal the FBI helped big banks and corporations to stifle the Occupy movement. Also today, Django Unchained. Does the film help the country to be less racist? And do you keep getting robocalls during dinner offering to lower your credit card interest and things like that? They're so pervasive now that the Federal Trade Commission is offering a prize to any software developer who can figure out how to stop them. First, though, the city in 2013. The mayoral race is, of course, a shorthand way of raising the larger question, what should the city's priorities be in the coming 4 years? Here to share his list is Jarrett Murphy, editor-in-chief of the nonprofit investigative news outlet, City Limits. Hi, Jarrett. Happy 2013.
Thank you. Same to you.
And we cherry-picked a few bullet points from your list. So let's go through them here, starting with the post-Sandy aftermath. And you seem to make a case that we can look to New Orleans to see some things to expect in New York, yes?
That's right. I mean, obviously the scale of the disaster there and here are different. We're a much larger city. The storm affected, in terms of a direct effect, a smaller portion than in Katrina's case. But there you had the immediate after-storm reaction and sort of a look at the emergency response. And that clearly is going on in the city. But the storm can have a longer-term effect in terms of transforming neighborhoods, transforming demographics, and forcing longer-term decisions about, whether to rebuild, how to rebuild. That can affect who moves back to neighborhoods because it affects how affordable it is to live there now. That all still has to play out. The Sandy story, we think now it's gone from the emergency response to the debate about the federal funding, but there are more chapters kind of yet to be written. And I think the candidates in the mayoral race will have a role in shaping them, both in the campaign dialogue and certainly in whoever takes office after 2013.
Are there any particular lessons from New Orleans affected communities in terms of things to try to avoid or things to try to replicate?
I think that New Orleans attracted a big crowd of sort of people who moved to the town after the storm hit to kind of be part of the recovery effort. I don't know if we'll see that develop. I think the thing is just be sensitive to the fact that, trying to recreate the pre-storm environment is difficult. The changes that come, it's difficult to kind of label them solidly positive or negative. One has to realize that's just how a city has changed and to kind of acknowledge that candidly.
Hospitals is another category of something that's really affected by Sandy. We saw what happened to Bellevue and NYU Medical Center. You seem to predict that there are going to be negative effects on the hospital system that'll last for a while?
Well, there's actually kind of two strands of strain on the city's hospitals. You mentioned what happened in and right after the storm. At least 5 hospitals closed down either in preparation for Sandy or immediately afterward. Bellevue, NYU Langone, Coney Island Hospital, the Veterans Hospital in Manhattan. That was a storm-related event, and actually the Independent Budget Office noted that below 32nd Street, as a result of the storm, for a couple weeks, there was no level 1 trauma center, which is a pretty incredible thing. So I think people will be looking at the resilience of our healthcare system because a lot of our hospitals are in evacuation zone A. But beyond that, even before the storm, we had a story in October looking at hospitals in Brooklyn that predicted that it was possible that over the next couple of years, 6 would close or merge. Already one of them, Interfaith Medical Center, has declared bankruptcy. That's a result not of the storm, but of just longer-term problems with the way hospitals are financed, the way their physical stock is built, and that's something that whether Sandy came or not, the city was going to have to come to grips with.
Is that a mayoral issue?
I think it could be. I mean, obviously the city has the Health and Hospitals Corporation with its 14 hospitals. They're a major player in the hospital scene. It's not something necessarily that the mayor can wave a wand and solve, but I think someone has to be a voice for having a rational discussion about that because it's often lost in the healthcare debate. We talk about insurance, we talk about quality of care, but the hospital part is something that I think we haven't really talked very much about.
Now, Brooklyn's Barclays Center was a huge hit late last year, as many of you know, at least a hit with a lot of people. Some people hate it. But the issues that long surrounded its construction are likely to come to the fore again in 2013, affordable housing and the city's land use and zoning process. In fact, a new documentary by Brooklyn resident Kelly Anderson takes a look back at what the neighborhood gained and lost when she moved in. Here's a brief glimpse.
Downtown Brooklyn is about to get a makeover to make it a vibrant 24-hour hub.
How could the city go to sleep at night knowing that they're going to force this down the very throat of people that live in the communities?
I think it's a really weird space, and I don't know how to interact with it, and I think they should just make it go away.
Now we are getting the area's first health food supermarket in the Torrent, which is going to serve everyone. A few years ago, you could not have attracted something like that to downtown Brooklyn.
What was the impact of my presence in my neighborhood? Was the kind of change I kept seeing inevitable?
You see how many people have moved out of here, though, Kelly? You see how all the stores are gone now? This block is completely abandoned now.
If you don't like wealthy people or successful profit-making businesses, you're not going to have a city.
Those excerpts from My Brooklyn, now showing at the rerun in Dumbo. And with those issues in mind, let's add a guest to our conversation, journalist Ed Morales. For 20 years, he's been an observer of New York and Latino politics. He's also a lecturer at Columbia University's Center for the Study of Ethnicity and Race, and joins us via Skype from Puerto Rico. Ed, hello from New York.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
So we played that excerpt from My Brooklyn. Do you think that the issues surrounding the Barclay Center do in fact go forward now, even though the battles all took place around the Ratner development and, you know, the movement that sprung up in Prospect Heights to fight it? Those, at least in the immediate sense, are done now as the thing has been built. Does it imply more issues going forward, though?
Well, yes. City Limits ran an article last August about the failure of the project to meet goals for providing affordable housing in the units that have been constructed. And that's often the case with projects like these. There are usually higher numbers of affordable units that are promised than are delivered. And besides that, the usage of the average median income for determining the affordability of the apartments is also problematic, because the average median income is drawn from the tri-state area in general, and that's usually a much higher because of the continuing inequality, the income inequality gap. There's becoming a greater difference of affordability between people generally in the tri-state area and the working class and poor people who live in neighborhoods like downtown Brooklyn or East Harlem or Williamsburg, whose average median incomes are considerably lower and often can't meet the requirements for what are called affordable housing units.
Yeah, that's an interesting trick of math, that when there are so many rich people in the area, it makes the average income look like it's higher when you average them all together, but it masks the fact that there are so many people with lower incomes who need affordable housing to be really affordable. And obviously that is going to be an issue going forward with the Barclay Center development. Are those promised units of affordable housing ever really going to get built? But Ed, can anything really change? We've been having the affordable housing conversation forever in New York. Some of the old models have broken down, like rent stabilization. That's not added to anymore. Now, after the housing bubble, the Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, try to get more lower income people into mortgages. That seems to have collapsed for the moment. What is the future of affordable housing in New York?
Well, yeah, sure. It's a huge problem that's going to be very difficult to solve. I mean, I imagine one thing that could be done is to change the way that affordable housing is determined to reflect more of the incomes of the people who are actually living in the neighborhood when the projects are approved, and to hold the developers' feet to the fire a little more, especially when it comes to the fact that they're receiving huge give-backs in terms of tax money when they're constructing the projects.
So Jarrett, let me come back to you on this. Do you see this as a mayoral campaign issue with some of the candidates staking out positions on how to go forward with affordable housing post-Bloomberg?
Well, I think they'll have to. I mean, remember, Bloomberg was forced to the affordable housing issue by housing advocates in his first term, and then by his Democratic opponent in 2005. That's how he got the mayor's affordable housing
And he promised
plan.
a large number of units. Was it 160,000?
Originally it was 65,000. That went up to 165,000. It was supposed to be a mix of about 60-40 new construction versus preservation. Over time, because of cost, they've had to scale that back in favor of preserving more units because that's cheaper. But there's something important to keep in mind. You know, it's a city of 8 million people, many hundreds of thousands of housing units. The mayor's plan, even if it had targeted the income groups that we all think or might think it should have, it was never going to single-handedly solve the problem. You know, on the other hand, one of the problems that's affected the creation of affordable housing in the city is that we create these units on one hand, on the other hand we do zoning and development projects that kind of work in the other direction. And I think the next candidates probably are going to talk about how better to reconcile the two. And the other point is that this is in part a rental housing issue, and in part it's an income issue. The fact is that people's incomes haven't been keeping up with any kind of expenses in the city. Median income is growing very, very slowly. Real income over several decades really hasn't budged much at all. So it's really difficult to maintain a housing stock that's affordable to people if their ability to afford anything is constrained. And I think this is kind of a wage issue as much as a rent one.
And since you also follow Latino politics, what do you think about Adolfo Carrion's apparent presence in this race? He, of course, is the former Bronx Borough president. He was a Democrat at that time. Then he went to work for the Obama administration in urban policy and then housing policy. And now suddenly he's coming home as a Republican to run in a presumed Republican primary for mayor.
Well, I think the Republican Party across the country is going to be looking for more and more candidates who are from minority groups to sort of counteract the fallout from their unexpected defeat in the presidential election, which was due to the alienation of Latinos in particular over the anti-immigrant and anti-Latino rhetoric that came out of hardline Republicans. I think that Adolfo Carrion could exploit this opportunity. He, in a way, is perfect for the ability of Republicans to run a sort of moderate to conservative candidate in a liberal city and gain an unusual victory. However, I feel that Carrion has been a little bit absent in the public consciousness since he took the job in HUD, and also might have a little problem with being fined for ethics violations a couple of years ago over some contracting he did for his house in City Island. So I don't know if he's the right person to take advantage of what could be a golden opportunity.
Let me get to one more issue real quick, Jarrett, and that is guns and stop and frisk. Mm-hmm. Is there a contradiction here that progressives cheer Mayor Bloomberg for being the national leader, really, of the gun regulation movement at this point, and at the same time they jeer him for stop and frisk, which is intended entirely to get guns off the street?
It could be perceived that way, but I don't think so. First of all, that is the premise of stop and frisk, but as you see every year, it's a very relatively small number of guns that are actually captured through that program. Mostly it's people being stopped who aren't found to have anything on them, and the arrests that are made tend to be for different crimes. But I think they actually are kind of two slices of the same onion. The fact that our society is flooded by guns that can be passed to other people without going through a background check, people being able to purchase multiple guns each year, that fuels an environment in which you could buy the premise that you need to stop hundreds of thousands of people, and that police could legitimately be thought to be acting in their own best interests, making those stops because of the guns that are out there. You know, sometimes a dangerous situation not only breeds the danger itself, but also the danger of an overreaction or an improper reaction. I think that would probably be the argument that progressives make to tie the gun issue and the stop and frisk together.
Ed, do you see this as a Latino issue? I think it's often portrayed as mostly an African-American issue, probably a Black and Latino issue. Christine Quinn, I read, has already said that she would offer Ray Kelly his job to continue as police commissioner. I don't know if that equals an endorsement of stop and frisk. Where do you enter this?
Well, it's certainly a Latino issue. I myself was actually stopped and frisked on 125th Street when I left the campus of Columbia University a couple of months ago. And Ruben Diaz made an interesting appearance in
current Bronx Borough president?
Yeah, Ruben Diaz Jr., I'm sorry. The Bronx Borough president made an appearance at this forest housing project complex, which I used to open the article that I wrote for City Limits, in which he stated that, he highlighted the importance that guns should be taken off the streets. So there's a kind of a conflict of interest because blacks and Latinos often live in the same kind of very difficult crime-ridden neighborhoods, and minority groups actually suffer from the same kinds of fear of gun violence that middle-class communities might suffer, in the aftermath of the Newtown connecting. So, unfortunately, there's always going to be some pressure to increase statistics for getting guns off the street. And I know that Commissioner Kelly reacted positively by reassessing the program slightly because of the pushback about the findings that guns were not really being taken off the street efficiently through the program. I think these things are cyclical. There are times when there's excessive use of force by the police and there's pushback by the community. And I wouldn't be surprised if stop and frisk comes back as the campaign unfolds.
All right, well, we will see. And we thank both of you for joining us. The first of many conversations on this program about issues pertaining to the mayoral race and also assessments of 12 years of Michael Bloomberg at City Hall. Up next, investigating Occupy Wall Street. Did the FBI help big business weaken the movement? According to documents recently released over the Christmas break, the FBI allegedly coordinated with big banks to stifle the nationwide Occupy movement that began back in September of 2011. Occupy movement defenders say it's a smoking gun and indisputable evidence of a highly integrated corporate state repressing dissent. The FBI says it is nothing more than a justifiable investigation of potential violent threats. The documents came to light as a result of a Freedom of Information Act request from the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund. Mara Verheiden Hilliard is the fund's executive director and joins us now. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us what these documents are exactly and when they were created, because I think the timeline is important here, right?
I think the timeline is important. The documents came as a result of Freedom of Information Act requests that the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund filed in the fall of 2011 in the wake of what appeared to be a coordinated crackdown on Occupy all around the United States. We filed these requests with both federal agencies as well as local municipalities and police departments. What we've gotten over the past year are a lot of documents showing coordination, showing discussion from different agencies, but the FBI had been stonewalling, and they released late to us we received them Friday, just before the Christmas holidays, about 100 pages that are heavily redacted, but within those pages show the breadth and scope of the FBI intelligence gathering and operations with regard to Occupy, showing that it's not just one office, but that field offices all over the country were focused on the Occupy movement, that were collecting information under the authority granted to them for domestic terrorism investigations. And notably, these documents show the FBI meeting and coordinating, including with the New York Stock Exchange in August 2011, which is a full month before the first tent even went up in Zuccotti Park.
Though we know that the Occupy movement organizers were meeting in August of 2011 and planning something. So if you are the FBI and you're informed that there's going to be some kind of action, direct action kind of protest involving Wall Street. Is it out of bounds, in your opinion, to then coordinate with the Wall Street banks, who are the alleged targets of whatever's going to happen for safety purposes?
The people of the United States have the right to engage in peaceful, lawful dissent without being targeted by their government. And the FBI, throughout its own documents, even though it's categorizing, reporting on, and taking intelligence on this movement, is categorizing them as lawful and peaceful activities. I mean, they repeatedly say that they recognize these are peaceful activities, that the organizers don't condone violence at the demonstrations, but yet they categorize them as domestic terrorism, as potentially criminal. I don't think, though, that we can look at this and separate this out, as under the proper authority of the FBI without really acknowledging the role of the FBI. This is the historic role of the FBI from the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. The FBI has always acted basically as a secret police against the social justice movements in the United States. These documents, though, do show this very overt coordination with FBI, Department of Homeland Security, acting in direct partnership with banks, with Wall Street, with the very entities that people were rising up to protest against, because those are the entities that have created the economic crisis in this country.
Well, in what ways, and how do you come to the conclusion that they were trying to stifle Occupy rather than monitor? Because you've said that the FBI acknowledged that this was lawful, First Amendment protected speech and protest and dissent. And reading from the New York Times article on the documents, it says the FBI was concerned that the movement would provide, quote, an outlet for a lone offender exploiting the movement for reasons associated with general government dissatisfaction. So that at least makes it sound like they were more worried that the movement would be exploited by some lone individuals than having an interest in suppressing the movement itself.
Well, the FBI press office, under pressure, is obviously now needing to find justification for what appears to be unconstitutional activities taken against a peaceful protest movement. I mean, the fact is, if you want to use that argument that the FBI needs to investigate every and any social justice movement, even though they know that it's peaceful and there's no threat of a crime being committed, on the possibility that there could be a lone actor somewhere who might somehow do something, all of it unknown, unstated, unidentified, and so they must investigate every movement. By those terms, the FBI could investigate every single person in the United States at any moment, because everyone is potentially, theoretically capable of doing something. And the fact is, too, the Tea Party was rallying all around the United States, the Tea Party which would be very proud of open carry and of bringing guns to its rallies and demonstrations. And yet here you have the FBI focused on what they acknowledge to be a peaceful social justice movement.
This is Barack Obama's, Eric Holder's FBI, if you go up the chain. Would they really have had an interest in this? And tell us, as we begin to run out of time, what's the worst thing you found in the document? Specifically, what's the worst thing that they did to intimidate an individual or a group?
Well, indeed, this is Barack Obama and Eric Holder's FBI, and it's very clear that this administration, from the onset, has taken no efforts to roll back the security, police statism that really took off after September 11th and under Bush in the United States. And throughout the documents, I think the thing that is very, very significant, very noteworthy, is really the breadth of this. It's not like you have one errant field office or one errant agent. You have field offices all around the country, meeting, coordinating, discussing, getting reports on. There appears to be infiltration, probably through proxy agents that the FBI works with, on a peaceful social justice movement, collecting information on them, and then acting really sort of as the de facto intelligent private security or private intelligence arm of the banks and of Wall Street. And I think the idea that American intelligence agencies in this day and age are conducting themselves that way is something that the people of the United States have a right to know about and a right to demand congressional hearings and other actions to expose and to stop.
Well, these documents are certainly worth reading through to the fullest extent, if for no other reason, because anything released on the Friday before Christmas when they know we're going into a 2-week dead zone for news where the American people aren't paying attention, indicates that there was something that they didn't really want to be discussed, which is one of the reasons we made sure to have you on our first show of the year. Thank you very much for joining us.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Coming up next, Django Unchained and Deconstructed. Slavery gets the Tarantino treatment. 2 weeks after its Christmas Day debut, Django Unchained is still on everybody's lips and on many screens. The Hollywood Reporter wrote, Quentin Tarantino, who wrote and directed the film, does not try to continue the slow unpacking of America's long legacy of slavery and subsequent racism. Instead, he plants a stick of dynamite in the country's baggage and detonates it all over the screen, unquote. But not everyone agrees that the film is so revolutionary. Also, some say the love story is being ignored.
I'm looking for the Riddle brothers. However, I don't know what they look like, but you do. They called my wife. They sold her. But I don't know who to. Calvin Candy. That's the repellent gentleman who owns her. Broomhilda is my property, and I can choose to do with my property whatever I so desire. Help me find the Riddle brothers, and I'll take you to rescue your wife. Let's get to it.
So, is Django Unchained just the high-voltage shock our hearts need to restart a compassionate discussion of slavery's consequences? With us via Skype, Tamara Lomax. She's a co-founder of thefeministwire.com and studies slave culture as a professor of African American Studies at Virginia Commonwealth University. And in our studio, Josie Gonzalez. She's a member of the Anti-Racist Alliance, a local offshoot of a 30-year-old national network which trains schools and community leaders to understand what racism is, why it persists, and how it can be undone. We appreciate both of you so much coming on to talk about the movie. Josie, I'll start with you. Did you like it?
I'm not sure if like would be the right word. It was long, a little tedious. There were some great one-liners. I loved the score. It was not bad. Not bad.
And in terms of helping or hurting your work in the anti-racism field?
Well, every time we have the opportunity to speak publicly about race, and when I say speak publicly, I'm not just talking about the Anti-Racist Alliance, but Americans overall. Every time we have the opportunity to put race on the table, grapple with it, it just serves the purpose to move the conversations forward. I certainly don't think that we want Tarantino to co-opt the conversation and disregard the amazing scholarship that's being done all across the U.S., including, I'm sure, by my fellow guests.
So, fellow guests, Tamora, what'd you think when you saw the film? Does it help America to have a conversation that we need to have?
Yes, I think that I fully enjoyed the film, first of all, for a variety of reasons. And the film, it has its problems, and it has several problems, but it also has some good. And one of the goods is that we are talking about slavery, not for the first time, but we're talking about it somewhat more normatively than we have in the past. So that is one of the significant goods of the film, outside of the fact that it shows a certain kind of representation of Black male and womanhood that is pretty significant for this time.
What do you mean by a normative view of slavery? What does the word normative mean there?
Well, not a normative view of slavery, but we're talking about it in a normative kind of way. Slavery has always been a very taboo discourse, even amongst some African Americans. In my field, I talk about slavery all of the time, and it is a normal thing to do. It's very normal to talk about slavery or slave history at the dinner table. However, it is not a normal thing to do at maybe my friend's house, who may be African American. There's still a very real discomfort around the discourse of slavery that we're being able to talk about right now with the film.
Josie, do you want to respond to any of that?
Sure. I'm Caribbean. I'm an immigrant, and we talk about slavery, but we speak about it within the global slave trade context, and we speak about the economic constructs. And so when we talk about slavery, we talk about what the international economic system rests on today was designed by the consolidation of the capital and wealth accumulation of the slave trade and slavery in the U.S. So we speak about it in those terms, and we look and recognize inequity based on that legacy of slavery. So the legacy of slavery is the wealth building of white America and institutions that support it, and the lack of wealth building and lack of asset accumulation for folks of color in the U.S.
To this day.
Mm-hmm, to this day. Mm-hmm.
But you were telling me off the air that you saw the movie in a mixed audience in Brooklyn.
I did, yes.
People have been paying as much attention to the audiences, it seems, as to the films.
Yes.
To the film itself.
Yeah.
Did you hear conversations taking place?
Interesting enough, I did. I overheard a middle-aged white couple, young, middle-aged, speaking of the N-word that was used in the film, and speaking of it in with a very tempered tone, with not in hushed tones, not in not being afraid that people of color who are around would find it uncomfortable or become angry,
not
or
using the euphemism, the N-word.
Nothing like that. Straight up. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In a different kind of way than they would have. They felt they were given permission by Tarantino?
They were given permission to have a conversation about it, and Tarantino gave that sort of permission. I mean, Tarantino, by using the N-word and by using two of the most popular actors on the scene today, he sort of made the movie comfortable for everyone. No one gets to confront. I mean, one of the things he does, I think, he's a genius at it, is that he sort of he highlights the violence with those folks who were enslaved, and he sort of makes buffoonery of the whites, as in that scene with the sheets not fitting right.
This is an early prototype
right,
of the
exactly.
Klan,
Yeah,
and their
exactly.
hoods aren't fitting right, and they look like Keystone Klans.
Right, exactly. And we're, folks are laughing. Well, there are crimes being committed on the one hand, but no one gets to pay the price for those crimes because, buffoons aren't, really responsible for their actions, and he does that quite smartly.
I think Django gets to blow some of those people up, doesn't he?
Well, he does at the end, yes, but that's all part of it, right? Yeah, so I think he's quite smart.
Tamora, Tarantino's take on the way he uses violence in the film is that he's using it in two different ways. So there's the cartoon-like violence that permeates a lot of his movies, and it recurs here. But then there's the violence that is committed against slaves in this film, and that is shown in a different light, that's not funny and really brutal, and that there's a moral streak in the way he portrays the violence against the slave characters in the film that is appreciably different from the other violence in the film, and by doing so, he makes an important moral point. That's his take on his film. Do you buy it?
I'm not sure. I do buy that there are different kinds of violences, and I'm not sure that it's such a binary. I'm not sure that I don't know that I buy that given his other films, and I'm not a Tarantino critic or even a Tarantino supporter per se, but I did see this movie. I'm not sure that he thought that much about it. I've seen bits and pieces of his other films, and I've seen some parts of the original Django. I believe it was made in the 1960s, and so I'm not sure that I buy that he strategically tried to formulate, two different kinds of violences for the audience. But I do buy perhaps that is the ultimate reality that we receive with the final package of the film, that there are different kinds of violences. There is this kind of comedic, tragicomic violence against white, I don't know if it's against white supremacy in general and white actors or white individuals in particular. And then this other kind of violence against Black bodies. I mean, to me, there are a variety of kinds of violences in the film. So I'm not sure that there is this kind of dichotomy, but there are different kinds of violence. For instance, the language is violence. Although I didn't have as much of a problem with the language as others, but the language is somewhat violent to the ears. The visuals are violent, but it's also what we hear is violent. There were many times in the film where I not only closed my eyes, but I closed my ears. I didn't want to hear the noises. So I'm not sure that he intentionally tried to have two different kinds of violences, but there are definitely different violences.
Well, he says he did in any case. But I'm told that you have sons and you would like your sons to see this movie. Do I have this right?
I do have sons. I have two boys. They're 11 and 12. And yeah, eventually, we've already talked to them about the film. And eventually, absolutely, I would like for them to see it. But now I should contextualize this because I am a historian and I do study enslaved populations diasporically and in the U.S. They also have studied along with me. They were kind of born into this reality. So they have a background to handle some of the violence. And this is, not something that we would send them to the movies to watch with their friends, but it's definitely something that we would watch in parts and discuss. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think it's something that they'll eventually see anyways. But much of it is not, I don't think much of it would be surprising to them.
Josie, there's been some discussion also of Tarantino standing, maybe just on the basis that he's a white guy, to make this film. I think Spike Lee had a reaction to that. I've heard other people say, there have been films that have tried to take this raw an approach to portraying slavery made by Black directors, and they could not gain traction or they couldn't gain funding, and that there's a certain white privilege even in Tarantino being able to get this film out. Yeah. Do you share any of that?
Of course. Yeah, I mean, I suppose I don't know him as a filmmaker, but having to encounter his movie for this discussion, there's a mythology that has been built up around him. I recognize when folks say, it's a Tarantino film. So there's this mythology about him, and he's writing that mythology and usurping a story that comes out of an experience, that comes out of a legacy that I think goes so far back in so many families. And yes, there are Black filmmakers who have stories, who have tried to do stories, but they've not been able to because they don't have the capital, they can't get the monies together to do it. Yeah, and he can because he's created mythology around him, and he can access the capital that Black filmmakers can't. I mean, he's using, as I said before, he's doing a couple of things. He's making the movie acceptable to to a younger generation, and using very popular factors. He uses two very popular actors, Jamie Foxx and Kerry Washington. He uses Sam Jackson. They're in very popular films. He uses the N-word that is rampant through rap. He's making all of these things comfortable so he can drive his picture. And there are lots of folks who are doing some very serious work that can't get it, disseminated, that can't get it filmed.
And so, Tamora, last thought. Why do you think so many Black and white people are so anxious to see this film and so anxious to discuss it? I think there's a stratification in movie audiences by race, like there is often on television, who watches what television shows, who goes to what movies. And here we see so much eagerness to attend and to discuss that seems to cross racial lines.
Well, I think for specifically African American women, there is this representation of Black womanhood that's constantly kind of shoved down our throats, right? So that there's very hypersexual, or loud talking Black woman, the angry Black woman. It's kind of this collage of different historical stereotypes that we are constantly having to deal with. And here is this story about this Black woman who is not only resistant and who understands her own sense of self, but she is loved. And she is loved enough for someone to give their life for her. We don't get to see that on television. We don't get to see that in the cinema. And so, you know, I know a big part of the question is, you know, who gets to tell what stories, and why does Tarantino get to tell this story? And is this a piece, you know, a bit of white privilege? And perhaps, but we have to give him credit for telling the story in a way that is very attractive to African-American women for a variety of reasons. Again, there is this idea of representation, and there's this idea of being loved, but there's also this this kind of savior figure that is sometimes necessary, particularly if you're talking about an African-American woman who is captive and who is seen as flesh in a patriarchal structure. It's very important to have someone there who will save you. And I'm also a scholar of religion. My PhD is in religion. And so, you know, and I also study Black Christian women and their kind of attraction to Tyler Perry movies. And I think the attraction to this film is very similar to the attraction to Tyler Perry movies. And again, there's a savior figure who is both a human male, so this is very patriarchal, but it's also this kind of godly figure. So I think that's one thing that, that's things that attracts particularly Black women to this film.
So across racial lines, across gender lines, hardly the last word that's going to be spoken in America about Django Unchained, but unfortunately the last word for today. Thank you both very much for joining us for a good conversation. And coming up, the feds offer a prize to the programmer who can defeat robocalls. Robocalls, they're like email spam, but worse because they reach right into our homes via that most private of communications tools, our telephones. The fact that they're mostly illegal doesn't seem to matter, and technology only seems to be making the problem worse, allowing prolific dialers to push out billions of these invasive disruptions. Consumer complaints to the Federal Trade Commission have also skyrocketed, standing at more than 200,000 a month. So the government watchdog is now dialing for help. It's called the Robocall Challenge. Joining us via Skype from Washington, D.C. to explain, FTC attorney Katie Daffin. Thank you very much for joining us. Hello from New York.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So what exactly is a robocall? Where are these robots?
So the definition of a robocall under the telemarketing sales rule has to do with the fact that when you pick up the phone, you hear a pre-recorded message, not a live person.
And go ahead.
I was just going to say that just means that, you know, the robots are really involved at the point of sending out the message, because what tends to be happening is that you no longer have a live telemarketer punching in someone's number and sending a call. Instead, you have computer programs that are just blasting out millions of these calls per minute using just a simple computer and a program that someone has written.
What's the contest? Tell us about it.
The Robocall Challenge is the Federal Trade Commission's first public challenge, and we are calling all innovators to help us do battle against these illegal robocalls. We're offering $50,000 to the individual or small organization that can come up with the best way of blocking illegal calls. We also have a separate prize that's for large organizations who'd like to compete just for bragging rights.
This is shocking in a way. The federal government doesn't have the capacity to enforce its law?
Well, that's not the case. We have been doing aggressive law enforcement in this area for a long time, and we're continuing those efforts. We have brought 101 cases to enforce the do not call rule. That's been against 289 companies, 226 individuals. And through these cases, we've stopped billions of robocalls. So that aggressive law enforcement is ongoing. But we also see reality, which is that these calls are happening at such a prolific rate because of changes in technology. Therefore, we wanted to, at the same time, take a look at whether technology might hold the key to some kind of a more lasting solution. And this contest is just one of the many different prongs in our action plan.
When is a robocall illegal? Is any recorded pitch that we get from any company illegal?
Not any recorded pitch. The definition of an illegal robocall under the telemarketing sales rule has to do with the fact that it is a marketing or sales call. So there are legal pre-recorded calls, for example, informational calls, emergency notification calls, and many others. But we're focused on those telemarketing calls, the annoying calls from Rachel from Cardholder Services and her ilk. And we know that these calls are really a source of incredible frustration for consumers.
Is it just that they're an invasion on our dinner hour, or is it worse than that?
It's worse. You know, the invasion of privacy is a huge harm, and especially where people rely on their telephone lines, as many of us do. This is actually a very intense disruption. But at the same time, these calls really concern us because most of them are peddling a scam. And that's why our advice to consumers is if you pick up the phone and you hear a pre-recorded call that's trying to sell you something, just hang up. What we've seen is that these people are already breaking the law by making the calls. They're not likely to abide by your desire to be taken off of the list or to talk to a representative. And they might just be trying to find out whether your phone number is a working number. So our advice is don't press 1, don't press 2, just hang up the phone. And if you can, file a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission, because those complaints really help us in our law enforcement targeting.
So the do not call list that many of us have signed up for, is it useless?
Absolutely not. The do not call list is now in use by, I think, 217 million phone numbers. And what we see is that legitimate telemarketers who abide by the law absolutely do download that list, and they don't place calls to those people. So if you're signing up for the do not call list, you're going to receive fewer telemarketing calls. The problem is the people who are willing to violate many different laws in placing their automated robocalls. And because of changes in technology, it's become really cheap to do that. You could do it from anywhere in the world, and you can spoof or fake the caller ID information that consumers see on their telephone when they receive the call. That makes it very easy to hide one's identity when placing these calls. Now, we're still able to find these people, track them down, and bring cases against them. But at the same time, we are really on the hunt for technological solutions.
How about the political calls that we all got flooded with before the election? Hi, this is Congressman so-and-so urging you to go out and vote for Barack Obama, Mitt Romney, choose one, for president on Election Day. And these were pre-recorded calls. Were they illegal too?
No, those calls are not illegal in most states. Those calls are not under our jurisdiction. The telemarketing sales rule really does only have to do with the sales calls. And there are First Amendment issues with making those kinds of calls illegal.
Why is crowdsourcing the problem a good way to solve it?
Well, crowdsourcing just refers to reaching out to information that's out there and using it to try to solve the problem. And what we've seen when we took a hard look at this space to see what technological solutions might be out there is that there are a lot of innovative people that are making use of people's complaints about robocalls in order to try to block future robocalls. So you can find apps for mobile phones that do this. We found one carrier in Canada that uses information from all of its subscribers to try to block unwanted telemarketing calls. And so what we've seen in our study of the marketplace is that crowdsourcing might be a really good option here.
So
and one thing I would note
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
One thing I would note for people who are interested in different solutions in this space is that we held a robocall summit on October 18th in DC, where we investigated crowdsourcing and many different potential and partial solutions relating to robocalls. And all of that day-long summit was videotaped and is available online. So if people are interested in particular technological possibilities, they can visit ftc.gov/robocalls and have access to the transcripts and the videos and the presentations from that day.
Is that the same website where people would enter this robocall challenge?
Yeah, if they go to ftc.gov/robocalls, they can find information about all of our initiatives to end robocalls, including the Robocall Challenge.
What's the deadline?
The deadline is coming up. It's January 17th at 5 p.m. So I encourage everyone to go to the site without delay if you are interested.
How creative have the entries been so far?
It looks like they're very creative. I haven't seen any of the technical proposals yet. I've only seen the brief descriptions that are available on the website. But we've seen a whole range of different solution types, in addition to a very robust discussion on the discussion boards there on the website.
And is there one winner who's going to get $50,000 or an unlimited number of winners if they come up with usable programs, or how does that work?
It will likely be one winner. The rules do say that if there's an exact tie, then the money would be split. But we foresee one individual or small team or small organization winning that $50,000. And then there's the separate track for the large organizations who might not care as much about $50,000, but who we hope will still be interested in competing.
All right, programmers, get those entries in. You might win $50,000. And everybody's eternal love if you can be the one who blocks the robocalls. And thank you very much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And that's our program for today. We debut a new show every Wednesday evening at 7:30. You'll be getting an automated telephone call to remind you every week. Just kidding. But do consider tuning in to my daily radio program at 10 a.m. each weekday on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. Tomorrow morning, your reactions to Governor Cuomo's State of the State address. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.